Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and this week I'm excited to bring you this conversation with Chris Shields of Rhinegeist Brewery on the important need for beer education by both breweries and consumers. But first, please go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can find original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Beer Travelers and Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. This show and all of the work we do, it's supported by you. So please go visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer. A few bucks goes a long way to help keep the content fresh and to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show or any of our shows, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, we'll get into the show in just a moment, but first, Ryan Sharp is here. He is the producer of the Best of Craft Beer Awards, which is a sponsor of this episode. And Ryan, welcome. I've had the chance to judge these awards in the past, and you know I'm not actually blowing smoke when I say that I was impressed with both the professionalism of the process as well as the caliber of my fellow judges. Clearly, I was the weakest link at the table at the time. But for those who are unfamiliar with the Best of Craft Beer Awards, tell the brewers listening about it and what it offers breweries.
All right. Thank you, John. What it offers is we attract a lot of the same judges as the other big competitions in Denver and elsewhere. And so entrants are getting the same caliber of feedback. And we provide table notes from the mid and medal rounds so they have a better idea why their beer did or didn't advance. And we think there's value to that beyond the initial judge feedback.
So what's new for the awards this year?
This year, we've added a smoothie sour category and a collaboration category that's judged as kind of its own separate thing as a best in show format.
All right. You're going to be back with me at the bottom of the show to talk more about the awards. But for now, brewers, go register your beers through January 31st of 2024 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Seriously, don't delay. You can learn more about the competition and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Okay, let me tell you about my guest today in his own words. Chris Shields is the Director of Education for Rhinegeist Brewery in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he performs staff, partner, and public engagement and outreach activities on beer and brewing. Before this role, he served as a brewer during Rhinegeist's rapid growth and helped develop their cider program. Before that, he was head brewer at Mystery Brewing in North Carolina for 4 years. With a decade of experience in the industry, he is an advanced Cicerone, a BJCP judge, a certified cider professional, and serves on the education committee for the Ohio Craft Brewers Association. He also holds an MS in biological sciences and has studied at Siebel. He represents Rhinegeist and the Hop Quality Group, the Brewers Association Drought Beer Quality Subcommittee, and is also honored to serve as a BA mentor. Originally, I had hoped to sit down with Chris on a recent trip to Ohio, but equipment issues at the time delayed the conversation. And that actually wound up working out in the long run because I was able to get his take on the recent conference and the role it and others are playing in educating brewers and, in turn, drinkers. This conversation is also going deep into the moves that Rhinegeist made early on that helped pave the path of success it's had over the last decade. Here's our conversation. First, thanks for doing this. And I was thinking about some of the conversations that we had at the Ohio Brewers Guild conference a couple of weeks ago. And this is sort of a fun opportunity because we were supposed to record there and I had equipment problems. But now with the benefit of 10 days behind us from that conference, I'm curious about your takeaways of being in that confined space, being among colleagues and peers and other folks industry adjacent. What did you leave that conference with, sort of feeling about, one, the state of Ohio beer, but two, where the industry may be in general?
Yeah. I think as with a lot of times and a lot of the recent events I've been to, they the last few things I've attended, the Ohio conference included, I feel like people are in pretty good spirits and pretty excited for what's to come. And not to say that there aren't challenges, there certainly are. It's a big topic on everyone's mind, and there was discussions about that at the Ohio conference. But I think people feel like we're we're addressing some of these challenges a little bit more head on. And I think that comes at us in a few different avenues. Different challenges need different resources and different expertise. One of the things I love about the Ohio conference is we do get a really good range of experiences and longevity. We're fortunate to have Great Lakes in the state. They've been around for several decades.
I think they hit 30 this year. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 30 or 35. I was going to say, but I couldn't remember.
It might have been 35. Yeah. It's hard to keep up at some point. Yeah.
Exactly. But, that level of consistency and, they're still, bringing new brands to market that are seeing success. Right. And while at the same time maintaining these brands that we all know and love that have been around for decades. And they participate in the conference. And so does the, 1.5 barrel tap room only, local breweries. And I love seeing the different avenues that people use to approach challenges. And the collaborative aspect of the brewing industry is one of the things that has initially drew me in, but also keeps me engaged and interested. That doesn't mean that everybody's not out there trying to sell beer and trying to have a successful business. I think sometimes that attitude gets a little misconstrued, and that like everything's fun all the time and no one ever gets upset. But it doesn't mean the opposite either, right? Like it's still, a brewery is our first phone call if we can't handle something in-house. And that's rare. And I think people outside the industry maybe don't have a full understanding of that. But I think we take it for granted a little bit.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you focus on some of the positives among the challenges, like there is still this undercurrent of maybe a little bit of hope or the excitement around it, because and I'll include us in this, us being all about beer. Like, I talk to a lot of folks and there seems to be doom and gloom. There's worry about the economy. There's worry about, although less so these days, but there's just sort of worrying about where the industry is headed. So there are these threads of positivity that, I don't know, that still exists, but it's nice to hear you put that first and foremost and not, the sky is falling kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think to some extent, if I thought the sky was falling, I'd be applying for, I don't know what the hell I would do, but I'd be applying for jobs outside the industry or something. Right. I do think there's hope. I also am not blind to the challenges. Beer is operationally flat at best right now.
Right.
But it's also important to remember that like beer overall is not every brewery. And if there are things that we can do or that anyone can do that pushes that needle positive or, brings even a little bit of excitement or engagement, those are the things that we need to do. The beer industry was spoiled for a long time with, really just spectacular growth. Mm-hmm. And I think we've seen, this, COVID certainly impacted that slowdown that was already happening, but it really forced us to come to terms with it. And I think the people and breweries and including allied companies, and companies like All About Beer and companies like malt and hop suppliers. They also have had to come to terms with this. But what you do in the face of that challenge is the exciting part. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have stood up and said, we're not going anywhere. Yeah, it's going to be harder than it was. But, nobody got into the beer industry for it to be easy. Like, I mean, there are
Well,
easier things
and the
that you
ones
can
who
do.
did have long been,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
pushed out. Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of we're so used to no churn in our industry as far as companies. And there's going to be some. I mean, there's, by every measure, there's, more breweries closing than there have been in recent history, but there's still breweries opening. And sometimes, a brewery closes and their top talent may go somewhere else and help another brewery do something
Yeah.
great, you know. And don't get me wrong, I feel for those owners and those founders that are going through that. The first brewery I ever worked at, it is now closed, and that's hard, and that's a challenge. But the vast majority of the people I worked with are still in the industry, and that's exciting to me because we're learning, we're taking that experience and applying it looking forward.
Yeah.
We aren't, we don't see the tap room traffic that we saw 5 years ago. Okay, how do we address that?
Yeah.
That's a challenge. It's exciting, and it means that we get to do things that we probably never would have done if we just continued to have people lined up outside the door when the door's unlocked, right? Like, I like that it's bringing diversity of experience to the industry, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah.
I'd love for that to continue to bring diversity of other types. I think it will. I hope it will. And all that is exciting to me. Like, yes, it's sure, it's not as easy to just, open your doors and crank out beer. Beer's not enough. And I think that's okay.
I like that. And I it's interesting in advance of this conversation. I mean, I remember when the brewery was founded and here we are, what, 10 years later. And I mean, it's by most accounts a meteoric rise, and but smart growth and focusing in on particular beers, and while growing, remaining flexible and adapting to the imaginations of the overall industry. And what is sort of interesting is, you talk 10 years ago, there's all these lines that were out there of like, oh, if you get into it now, like, you're never going to be Sierra Nevada. It's if you get into it now and 5, 6, 7,000 other breweries are all getting into it at the same time, don't plan your future around even being like a regional powerhouse. Focus on the small taproom model, and like you can be okay. And everything that you've been saying sort of so far is, in my mind, speaks to what I imagine are pretty honest conversations in the mirror of the company over the last couple of years to get to where you are. And I don't know how many people actually have those conversations, those honest, like, okay, like, if we're going to do something, we got to do it all the way. Or if we're going to do something, like, we can't just, like, wishes and hopes or that kind of thing. And, I'm sure that there's been tough days along there, but what is, like, the 9 years that you've been there, like, what have those conversations been like, the ones that
Yeah,
you've been
it
in,
was.
to get to where you
Yeah,
are
yeah.
now? Yeah.
That's a great point too. I joined as a shift brewer basically to the company in early 2015. So I do think that, one, I want to acknowledge the growth that Rhinegeist had, and it was awesome in probably multiple true definitions of that of that word to be a part of that. But we also have the benefit of, I feel like we went through more than 10 years of experience in those 10 years. Certainly not unique to us. I think a lot of people had, a wide swath of experience. But, when I joined Rhinegeist, I don't even think there was a job open. It was just everyone was running and pushing and trying to keep up with demand for our beer.
Yeah.
And it was, the brewing team was just, there were about 4 or 5 people. It was cranking, it was brewing, it was dialed in as best as it could be. And that translated out all the way from our packaging team to sales. We started in self-distribution, and we still do self-distribution in part of the state. But it was the things happening, at least from my perspective in the background, were okay. Initially, we were renting what is now our taproom space, and very quickly, Bob and Bryant, who are our founders, along with our initial investors, realized that if we're going to grow, this isn't enough. This isn't enough space. And okay, we're growing. Let's take advantage of that. And they invested a lot of that growth that we were seeing into purchasing the building, bringing in a larger brew house. We opened with a 20-barrel brew house in late June of 2013. And when I set my foot in the door the first time in March of 2015, there was already a 60-barrel brew house on site. It wasn't quite up and running yet, but it was already there.
Yeah.
And it was, and so we were able to, one of the first things I did after kind of, learning my way around our original system and brewing there was helping a couple other of the team get the big brew house up and running.
Yeah.
Now it's running, so much more efficiently and with a beauty that it never did when I was involved. So shout out to our current production team. I could never, I remember during COVID, there was a joke. It was like me and a couple other of our team that had brewed. It was like, well, if the brew team goes down, you guys are up. And it was like, all right, I'm pretty sure we can make beer, but it is not gonna,
right.
It is not gonna handle what it's used to. That team, it's a synchronized symphony for sure. They're brewing like 24/6 right now. And so seeing that growth, but also that investment back into the stability and structure of the company.
Yeah.
And, at the time I wasn't involved in that, but I remember it was 2018, I believe. So about 5 years into our life as a company that we hit 100,000 barrels. So that growth was wild, but that was also, that's, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Fuzzy math, but, we've also, we did 109,000 barrels last year. So
right.
We grew last year, but it wasn't at, 300% like it was in the past. We are happy and excited to have grown. I think one of the big benefits for us is we had, going into 2019, purposefully slowed down a little bit, right? One, we knew that our space couldn't, we don't have infinite resources in our space to just continue to grow the way that we were. So we said, let's step back and let's start working on being more efficient, being smarter, dialing in some of our processes and our SOPs. A lot of those things where we had SOPs, but they were loose and they weren't super refined because we didn't have time. And as I said, I think it was fortunate for us timing that we took some time before everything really got rough to do that. And that meant that all that continued during COVID. I'm proud to say that we were able to keep most of our team, and that team was was nearly 300 people, and that's about how many people are on our team now.
That's
Um,
incredible.
you know, now not everybody was doing what they were doing before, but
Right.
that that's also not uncommon. I mean, people did what they could,
Of course.
um, and but coming through that, it was also a time of transition. It was, our founders were honestly planning to kind of step back right before COVID, and that really delayed their exit. They kind of certainly didn't want to, like, all right, peace out, guys, have fun dealing with COVID. And there's, obviously they're still involved. They're still running the company from a bird's eye view,
Yeah.
but they in those over the last 5 years, they've put a lot of focus in really building our leadership team and focusing on putting things in place for the long haul. And we've got Adam is now our CEO, and he's been really fantastic. But and this is not in any way meant to be a slight on Adam, but part of his success is that we have a bunch of other people around him
Mm-hmm.
that have been at the brewery, understand the industry, bring their level of expertise, and we really do have a great leadership team. And that's something that allows us to be flexible and adaptable, because when things are going tough for production, that impacts sales, right?
Sure.
The beer has to be there. And so having these leaders that are having open conversations, nothing, limiting surprises, things like that, that allows us to be flexible. And that flexibility is, as you mentioned, it's so important these days.
Yeah.
Not everything works, and you have to be flexible to respond to that. We've seen that in some of the Rhinegeist products that folks aren't going to see anymore.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to put out new innovation. That's sort of if all your innovation works 100% of the time, I mean, awesome.
Well, yeah, good on you. Yeah. Yeah. Tell us how. Yeah.
Right. That has not been our reality. So
So
that's where I think a lot of excitement comes from. I mean, our marketing, all our marketing and design is in-house. That I think is a huge advantage. And one of the big advantages of that is familiarity and flexibility. Our marketing team knows us, they know our brand, and they can turn on a dime. That's an advantage. And so it's understanding what your advantages are. I know that not everybody has marketing in-house. Some people do, some people don't. But in the same way, it is very complicated the way we do distribution. We self-distribute in Cincinnati and Columbus markets, and we use wholesalers in the rest of Ohio and in the other states that we're in.
Yeah.
Operationally, that's complicated.
Yeah.
I will tell you that. I have the slightest view on some of those processes, and it's complex.
Yeah.
But we try to take advantage of the benefits of self-distribution in those circumstances, and take advantage of the partnerships that we have with our wholesalers in those circumstances. You get to some extent what you build, and doesn't mean you can't change what you've built, but ignoring it and tossing it aside isn't going to help you either.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear some of those early days, right? In the last couple of days, we're recording this towards the end of January of 2024. There's been a few breweries that I've seen put up announcements about closing, and in some cases they're talking about COVID, but there were two that stood out where, and these are breweries that have maybe been around as long as you guys, maybe just a little bit less, and they're citing their landlord as the reason that they have to close. It's either
Mhm.
the landlord sold the property without consulting us, or, they're raising the rents, well beyond our means, or anything else like that. And they're painting a picture, and I don't know their books, these two that I'm thinking of, where it's like, well, we would have been okay if it wasn't for the landlord. And in the last decade or so, there have been these sort of things that bubble up where, brewers get into a place, they get comfortable, things are okay, and then the landlord pulls the rug out from underneath them, and, holy shit, we have to move, or, we weren't expecting this, or anything else like that.
Right.
Some of those moves of just like having real estate, which I know is enormously expensive, does kind of help give peace of mind when you're in control of your own land destiny. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that was something that before I even showed up at Rhinegeist, Bob and Bryant, they didn't want to put a 60 barrel brew house in a building that, as you said, they didn't have control over, for for whatever that's worth. Anytime you own a building in a city, control is maybe limited, but that's something that has been a great advantage for us, is we own our property. And I've seen some of those as well. And I've even seen, I mean, I'm sure you have also, there's other breweries that are saying, okay, they're not closing, but their rent has doubled, or,
right.
Gone up an extra 50 or 70%. Like,
yeah, doubled if they're lucky.
Those are real, like, those are real problems, right? I love the quip, and I don't know where it came from, but one of my favorites, that when I'm talking to people outside the industry is, they say the way to make a small fortune in brewing is to start with a large fortune.
Yeah,
it's not, you can see success, but so much of that success is often put back into the brewery. And when something like your projected, rent costs or utility costs or ingredient costs, and all of those things are going up now, that goes up, that's hard. That's a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, we raised pricing in our tap room in 2022, I think, for the first time ever.
Yeah.
We didn't, and like, it was funny because we were terrified to do it. Right.
Well, sure.
And I remember talking to
no matter how good the beer is, you're always going to wonder,
absolutely,
like, will people think it's worth the extra, 50 cents,
right,
a dollar, whatever it is? Yeah.
Right. And I remember talking to some of the bartenders after we did it, and, not across the board, but to some extent, the response was, people pay with their credit cards anyway. I'm not even sure how much, like, people don't seem to care. Now, does it mean that maybe they had 2 beers instead of 3 beers and never said a word? Absolutely. That could be happening. But, that the benefit of everything getting more expensive is everything's getting more expensive. And there's only so many things you can complain about, I suppose.
Sure.
And that's where, I think that we've seen that, for the most part, people that are, dedicated to drinking craft understand where things like, people are experiencing it in other avenues of their life. It's not the brewery owners or the Brewers Association or whoever it is saying there's an isolated issue causing price increase for beer. Everyone sees it. Everyone's experiencing it. I see it when I leave the house.
Yeah.
In Cincinnati, the housing market has, in the grand scheme, is quite relatively affordable, but the value of my house has gone up. But if I were to leave, I'm just buying into another expensive house. Right. So
yeah, we've had that conversation. It'd be nice to move for, maybe we get a down payment, but then what? Yeah.
Right. And so, fortunately, I don't plan on going anywhere.
Sure.
But that's that's what, as you said, like, these breweries that are in rental spaces, those landlords, some landlords, as you said, a lot of times these commercial leases are 5 to 10 years. And that 10-year mark is running up on a lot of breweries that opened.
Yep.
I've been, I used to tell people, and I guess I still do sometimes, people say, how long have you been in the beer industry? And I will say something like 8,000 craft breweries ago.
Right.
Which maybe is not a helpful answer if you're not in the beer industry, but that doesn't make sense. But it is pretty wild. There's a lot of breweries that have opened in the last dozen years, and a lot of them are gonna have and are going to be in these lease negotiations coming up. And that's something that, I mean, it bums me out. You see somebody who's they've made it work. They've balanced their business in a way that works for them, and they're just all of a sudden seeing some of these increases. And I think it's hitting, I think the people that have 3 or 4 years on their lease, they better be figuring out how to make it work going forward.
Yeah. Now's the time to start thinking about, the future of the land.
Right.
Not at the 6-month renewal mark, but at the,
Like, right. How can I?
Hey, we were just
I,
notified and got our 30 days, and holy shit, it's
exactly.
a fire sale. And we don't know what the future brings, but come buy our beer because we're gone. And
yeah. And that's part of the business side of running a brewery. I think that was another sort of swinging back to your initial question of some of the themes of the Ohio conference. I think that there was definitely a focus on the running a business part of running a brewery business.
Yeah.
That I think is something that is really helpful and really important. We had a top 10 legal mistakes presentation. We had a balance sheet conversation. We had like all of these things. Maybe it's not as sexy as talking about which new malt variety or developments in hop technology, but you can't have one without the other. And I think that's I hope that continues as far as people learning what they don't know. And that doesn't have to be water chemistry. It can be EBITDA. So I feel like that's a sentence that I've never said.
I was going to say. I mean, I'm glad to let you keep going on that if you want to, but yeah, that's it's cool to hear. One, I mean, the real estate angle of it, but then two, talking about having marketing in-house, because it does help, unify the message and unify, the team and sort of helps with brand cohesion. And then that sort of brings me to your role within the brewery of education and having that in-house and having an actual dedicated person, whose job it is to educate, to be a teacher, to be an advocate for, how to treat beer properly, both in house and then to sort of help the general consumer. I wonder briefly if you can just sort of talk about, how'd you go from, an assistant shift brewer to this?
Right. Yeah, it was, when I came in from, I lived in North Carolina previously and worked at a brewery there, and moved to Cincinnati and took the job brewing at Rhinegeist. One of the things that was different was I was, working at a much smaller brewery and doing a lot of other things, not just brewing. I was brewing a lot, but I was also, doing events, helping out with, everything. We were involved with a homebrew club. We were right. I mean, it was a small brewery.
Sure.
That's how that works. And when I got to Rhinegeist, Jim Matt, who is our founding head brewer, him and I had a lot of conversations, and it was really, when I came on, there was some debate of like, well, we need some help in the brew house, but we also are going to need some help in getting our lab and our quality program up and running a little bit better and stronger. And we want to do some education because we're hiring a bunch of people as we grew. And not all of those people are super into craft beer or knowledgeable about craft beer or even care necessarily about craft beer. I mean, most of them did because that's how they found us at that early stage. But, to be a great accountant, you don't have to be an expert on craft beer.
Right.
But our view was that if you're going to be a great accountant for a brewery, we'd love it if you know a little bit about beer. The example I always gave was, okay, you told your friends you got a job at Rhinegeist. I guarantee you they're asking you beer questions and not anything about your job. Right? That's kind of the reality. I was just talking to one of our maintenance guys who's relatively new, and he was like, yep, that was my experience 100%. He's like, nobody wants to hear about what kind of pumps I'm rebuilding and the way we manage our maintenance and preventative scheduling and right. He's like, everyone wants to ask about like truth or,
right.
What's the hard tea about, right? Like,
yeah,
that's what people outside see. So we figured people should be educated. And that started as Jim and I helping out along with some of the other brewers doing just kind of some very informal staff training. And as we continued to grow, Jim actually moved more into the lab space. He's currently, he's still with the brewery. He's our chief science officer. So he really has just, he's completely kind of shifted off the brew deck and focuses on our quality program. And for myself, kind of over time, did the same thing. It was after maybe a couple of years on the brew deck, started doing more regular training. Some of that started with bringing some of the Cicerone program certifications into the brewery. That's been, that we've worked with Cicerone for a long time, for a number of years, running, I would run trainings and then we would get people set up to take the certified beer server exam.
Right.
We liked that because it's external to us, right? It's an outward demonstration that these people have, some level of knowledge. Did the same thing with running some classes for our staff about for level 2 for certified Cicerone. And that's something we've done for a number of years. And then just, it started internally and then it eventually sort of spread into, somebody on our sales team might say like, hey, like we've got this restaurant group that they're going to come in, they're going to tour the brewery, but could you spend half an hour with them just talking about beer? And that's a lot of what I do when I'm interacting with folks on the retail side or even wholesalers. I'm rarely talking specifically about Rhinegeist or Rhinegeist beer. My line is, whoever your sales rep is, that's who's selling to you. I'm selling you on beer. I do grain to glass or off flavor tastings or kind of whatever, sometimes just some sessions on beer pairing. And sure, are the examples of beers that I give Rhinegeist beers? Absolutely.
Well, sure.
But what I'm saying is not specific to Rhinegeist. And that's where I think education shows its importance is I'm a big believer in the idea that if someone, you don't have to be an expert, but if somebody knows a little bit about what they like or knows what question to ask or knows how to get started, then they're going to make a more informed consumer decision. And if the person that they're asking those questions of, whether it's a bartender at a tap room or a server at a restaurant or a clerk at a grocery store, if that person has a little bit of knowledge and can maybe nudge them in the right direction, then that's a more positive experience for that consumer. And that's craft to me, right? It's helping people find what they like. There are certain beer styles that I like very much. There are certain beer styles that I don't like as much. I appreciate them, but I only learned that by learning about those styles and trying them.
Yeah.
So, I always say, like, I don't get upset if somebody says they don't like one of our beers. I get not upset, but I get bummed out when people aren't willing to try something. Um, and that curiosity is what excites me about beer in general. And I think putting some structure in place, whether it's at your own brewery or working with your distributors or your retail partners, and not everybody's interested in doing that, but the ones that are, I think and I hope they see benefit there.
Yeah.
The other thing that I do, which is arguably, not terribly education specific, I get a lot of questions sometimes of like, oh, do you just do like staff trainings all day, every day? No. But a lot of what I do is kind of translating a little bit back and forth from the production side to the sales and marketing side, or with working with our taproom staff. Different backgrounds and different strategies and different areas of the company use different language and come from different perspectives and have different goals to some extent. So trying to make sure that, like, I think of myself sometimes, and this is going to go over the head of probably anyone born after 1989 or something. But I always remember those BASF commercials. It was like, we don't make a lot of the things that you use. We make a lot of the things that you use better. Granted, I still have no idea what BASF does or did.
Sure.
But that's a little bit of that's a little bit of the approach that I take to my day to day. I might be working with our marketing team on one project one week and with our private events team on something completely different the next week. But if I can help share some knowledge about beer, improve, maybe take a look at the tap lineup in the private event space and help them identify, hey, we're getting a lot of questions about, people that come in and they want a beer like this. What can we put on that's going to scratch that itch for people?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that I'm doing kind of day to day. And that's fun. I mean, I'm all over the place in the best way. I mean, probably anyone listening to this is cognizant of that. I will just talk and tangent and run wild as my brain goes. I did a tour this weekend for a group, and I don't normally give tours, but I was available and we did some tasting and it was a fun afternoon, right? Like, that's the kind of stuff that is exciting to me. It keeps me connected. It keeps me engaged. It's why I try to be as involved as possible as my time allows with organizations like the Ohio Craft Brewers Association, with the Brewers Association, not at the national level. I try to be connected to some of our suppliers. I don't, our hop suppliers, I know a fair amount of them and I spend time with them. I don't buy hops.
Right.
Rhinegeist buys hops, but I don't. But they're happy to have a conversation with me and explain some of the new things that they have going on. And then that helps me be able to explain it to our team.
Have you
seen? That's where.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and that's where those relationships, those connections are I think are valuable, and it's why, I try to do that with folks that I come in contact with. I think of connection as a big piece of what I do.
I imagine the answer is yes to this, but have you seen the dividends of, having the accountants understand what's happening and having, being that link from, production to marketing and, events and all that has just the nature of those baseline conversations, that baseline education before you get into the deeper stuff. Does it put the brewery on better footing? Like overall?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly think so. Right.
Yeah. If you say, no, it's all a scam, like, then we're going to end the show here. But yeah.
Yeah. But I'll fully admit that is that a super easy thing to demonstrate on paper? No. Are there individual examples of things that have been beneficial? Absolutely. Everything from, Maybe somebody in packaging noticing something off in a beer and realizing that, you know, this is a new brand, but we're supposed to be packaging style A, and this liquid doesn't match what I know about style A. So it, it was a mistake on how the tank was labeled, right? Like, and not putting the wrong beer in a bunch of cans is absolutely financially valuable. But even just like with our marketing team, I hope they would agree and say that they benefit from that connection with me and with our production team. It's one of the things that, as much as I'm sitting here saying that we do it, a lot of what I spend my time thinking about is how do we do it better? How do we better connect these groups? How do we, we have 300 employees. Like that's a lot to manage, and people are on different shifts and working in different roles and responsibilities, but having some of that connection in both directions, right? I think our brewers benefit from having conversations with our marketing team and understanding a little bit of what their challenges are. I have found my way into some of the compliance and regulatory areas that I never thought I would be in. And even just being able to talk to our brewers or talk to the marketing team who's designing cans or packaging and say like, hey, maybe we don't want to say this way, or maybe we legally can't say this way, early on, before it's, okay, well, we've really locked into this design decision and it's confusing, right? Things like that.
What's the future of beer education?
Well, my cheeky answer, of course, is that's going to be, I think, one of the big topics of discussion at CBC. I'm very excited. I'm going to be sitting on a panel with Max Finance from ABV and M from Pints and Panels, along
and
with
the All About Beer podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. And
not to take Pints and
that's
Panels
true.
away from
I
M.
was just listening to Kernza.
Yeah.
So but also the Kaylin Kirkpatrick, who is, as of relatively recently, last year or so, the first director of education for the Brewers Association. And I think that, I certainly have my personal opinions on where education is going, and happy to share them. But I'm really excited to hear what those folks think as well, because they're all people that I respect, and I think they come at education from maybe a different perspective than I do, and bring different strengths and see different impacts than what I see. I think one of the things that is really challenging in beer education now is we've mostly grabbed the people that are going to be extreme beer. They're going to go all in on learning everything they can about beer. And I don't mean, like, of course there's people coming to beer and going, down the rabbit hole deep every day as people discover craft beer. But what's really important is for us to get people to discover craft beer and to recognize that not everyone is like me and wants to spend their free time reading books about beer or memorizing style guidelines. I never wanted to do that.
No.
But that was, I think so much of beer was built around the history of brewing, and certainly I want to be cognizant to be aware that it was the Western, very European history of brewing, and that shaped the early days of craft. In the 90s, early 2000s, you're going into a brew pub. There's going to be, you talked about this in Ohio. There's going to be a brown ale and an ale and a stout and a blonde ale, and those all have their roots in that European brewing tradition.
Mhm.
Now stuff is all over the place. People are
Yes.
brewing all kinds of things. We as American craft beer have a history now. You know, we have history. So there's so much that doesn't fit neatly into the quote unquote established guidelines. I think that styles and style guidelines are very important because they provide context. But I think we need to also understand how to talk to people and how to convince people that beers that don't fit style guidelines are also worthy and great. And how do we talk about those? And how do we get people excited about those? And how do we get people excited about adding beer, into their repertoire? Bart's omnibibery argument, right? People drink lots of different stuff. It'd be awesome if that was beer for more people, right? Like that's it. Like to me, that's the end game, right? We need people that can go into a bottle shop, a grocery store, look at a tap list, look at a restaurant list, and one, see some variety, but two, understand how to choose and choose mostly right for them.
I like that. I hope brewers are paying attention to what you just said there, because yeah, I want to see more of it, and I want to see. Yeah, I don't see as much of it as I'd like, and I like what you're doing. So yeah,
And don't get me wrong, like it's tough. It's easy, right? I mean, I can sit here and say like we should have this huge variety of things for people to try across color and flavor and everything like that. But every time we brew anything with Belgian yeast, it doesn't sell, right? Now,
right.
Is
Yeah,
some
but
of
what
the
if you put
reason
it in
for
a
that
750 green glass bottle?
right,
Then it's gonna
right.
sell. Yeah.
But is some of the reason for that like I don't think it's that people don't like those flavors. I think that people don't know what those beers are like. And that's kind of what I mean for like I think talking about flavor more than style, talking about the experience of a beer, which is like maybe very esoteric and meta, but that's what's gonna convince somebody, because not everybody cares that a beer is, it's a 300-year-old style from the northern part of Germany. Like, okay, I think that's neat, but I need to be aware that not everybody thinks that is neat.
Right.
Right? Somebody might just want something that's like interesting and provides a different flavor experience. Oh, you like margaritas? You probably would like Berliner Weiss. And hell, half the Berliner Weiss that are out there aren't even called Berliner Weiss. So you might like this tart beer that is on the list, right? Like that's great.
And using
like,
the word tart over sour and using,
Right.
I dig that. When is if you have it off the top of your head, just so people can start to mark it on their calendars, when is the conversation during CBC in Las Vegas this year?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I think they're posted.
Okay. Then just go to the website. I think it's just craftbrewersconference.com. But yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I was like, I can look it up quickly, and
no. That's fine. I'm putting you on the spot with that. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you the green door question, which is what I've been asking folks on the show for quite some time now. And the premise is on the television show The Good Place. In the final season, they introduced the concept of a green door where the characters can walk through it and be anywhere doing whatever they want to be doing. And if we had a green door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended and you could walk through it and be at any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
Yeah. So I knew this was coming, and it's funny because the Sean and from Noble Beast, who was just on, you guys were talking about Bamberg, and
Yeah,
I've never been, and that is very high on my list. But um, I think one thing that would be uh, really neat is I'm so interested in where beer is going. Um, I think I would love to just like walk through a green door and pop myself into, like the best new brewery of 2030 and have a pint or it probably, maybe we're metric by then. I don't know, 250
sure.
mils of of their flagship. And
Served to you by a robot. Yeah.
yeah, probably. No, but I think that's the thing. I don't think people are going away. I'm a bar sitter, so I would just want to sit up at the bar, and maybe the person that I'm there with is the person serving me that beer, and just talk to them about what the industry is like now, and have my Biff moment of seeing where the world is going. Um, because I can't even guess.
Yeah.
If we'd had this conversation 5 years ago, I would never have guessed that this is where we are.
No,
So I love the idea of like, let's jump like 10 or 12 years into the future and see what people are drinking.
I really dig that. And I hope, 6 years from now that you're still out there educating and that people are still eager to learn and to embrace all that's around them. So, Chris, thanks for being on the show this week. Thanks for taking the time and sharing some insights. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I've it's been great having conversations with you, and uh, really enjoyed being on the show. And I did find it. It's Wednesday, April 24th, 10 to 11 a.m.
Perfect. That's just late enough where, yeah, you can shake
Just
off the
time to
night
get some
before.
coffee before we jump in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you should be offering that Bloody Marys for everybody who shows up.
Yeah.
So where are you focusing your beer education these days? Tell me about it. Get in touch with questions, comments, or guest suggestions as well by emailing. It's John Hall, that's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com. A reminder, go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, which has some pretty cool This Week in Rauk Beer hats still available. You can also read great new content as well as the archives going back to 1979. And since I brought up This Week in Rauk Beer, don't forget you can find all of your smoked beer needs on This Week in Rauk Beer. Search the Facebook group or on Twitter and Instagram. It's at TW Rauk Beer. All About Beer is on social media as well, at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, and I hope you are, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com, or you can go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer, and a few bucks goes a long way. Speaking of advertising, all right, as promised, once again, I'm joined by Ryan Sharp. He is the producer of the Best of Craft Beer Awards, and he's here talking about what makes this competition a cut above the rest and why brewers should get involved. Ryan, there's often a question about when beers are received versus when beers are judged. And I know a lot of brewers try to time up their submissions and their entries with when things hit the table. What's the timeline like for the Best of Craft Beer Awards?
Yeah, we've really kind of dialed in our process so that we can organize all those bottles and cans in cold storage and get them ready to judge and turn it around in 2 weeks versus 3 to 5 weeks at some of the other large events.
And then what about how you communicate with the breweries?
Well, we try to hold ourselves to the same same level of communication as we do for the judges, and we try to answer calls and emails promptly, whether it's questions about the process or the categories themselves. we kind of want to demystify it so that brewers are confident how it's run and don't find out after the fact that an entry got bounced because it was in the wrong category or on some other technicality.
Yeah. And you offer a lot of feedback as well.
We do. Yeah. We give them table feedback from the mid and middle rounds as well as the individual judge feedback in the preliminary rounds. But we think there's some additional value to be added in those finding out, exactly why a beer did or didn't advance.
I like that. What have the previous winners or some of the previous winners told you about their experiences with entering into the Best of Craft Beer Awards?
Well, we're really proud of the number of breweries who come back year after year. They tell us our competition is a great proving ground before they pay the higher entry fees at World Beer Cup or GABF. And that they send the brewers to judge with the competition because it's a fun experience and they see it as a professional development, getting exposed to such a wide cross-section of beers. And it's pretty good networking too.
I like that. All right. So brewers, you now know what to do. You can register your beers through January 31st, 2024 by visiting the bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Seriously, don't delay. You can learn more about the competition and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't forget about the All About Beer podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And original content goes up on probrewer.com every Tuesday from the writers of All About Beer. So check out probrewer.com. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.